Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Navaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib. I am honestly, truly excited about this conversation. It's been a long time coming. We've been trying to get this one to happen for a long time, and we finally were able to find a time that worked for both of us. So I'm very, very honored to have Maggie Awad here with me. How are you, Maggie?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited to be on here. I'm also excited about your work and just talk about how the gut and the brain, how that influences performance and energy in our lives. So super excited.
I love it. I want to share just quickly how we became connected. And it really was just like an Instagram thing, right? I started taking a look at your Instagram content. You were looking at my Instagram content. We started commenting and supporting each other and sharing. And it was just this very synergistic view of how do we utilize vagus nerve, gut health, optimal foundational health in high performers. And I was really interested in your work because you work with a lot of professional athletes. And that's a unique niche in our world, in the functional medicine, functional sports medicine world. So I'm really interested to kind of understand your origin story and get to know about your training as a nurse practitioner, and then how you continued on into this functional sports medicine area. How did that go?
Yeah. So I worked actually before becoming a nurse practitioner as a nurse for 16 years, did mostly pre and post-op. I also worked so that's surgical, worked on the mainly orthopedic floor. So I also got to see also how physical therapists worked with their patients, which was really cool. And since a lot of my people that do follow me are physical therapists and athletic trainers, and so really got to see hand in hand what they do. Fast forward, decided to become a family nurse practitioner. Had no idea that I was going to go into sport. And I've always been this person that was very curious. And of course, we know in our training, we learn about the disease, we learn about the pathophysiology of the disease and what to prescribe. And I was always one of these people, well, why do they have the disease in this first place? Why is diabetes prevalent? Why are we having this obesity? Why all this stuff? And this is what kind of got me really into more in that functional medicine, which is looking at the body from a systems perspective and that everything in our body relates to each other. And so from a sports perspective, I crossed paths with a mentor of mine, Dr. Ara Supaya, and he did a lot of work with professional athletes and looking at what causes chronic inflammation. That really piqued my interest because for myself, I train pretty consistently. Right now, I have a healthy relationship with training. Before I did not. A lot of my training that I did was really addictive, especially since I was training about 7 days a week, and it was mostly during COVID. And so what I noticed for myself is I started having low energy and I wasn't recovering really well. And it wasn't until I started doing functional medicine testing on myself, meaning looking at the gut, doing a lot of mitochondrial testing, where I was low in so many nutrients. I had leaky gut. I had pathogens, I had candida, I had things that was going on in my body that I had no idea that was causing all these symptoms.
It's always interesting to kind of hear the personal journey and kind of the health journey that we are each on. And I really think that this functional lab testing piece helps to open our eyes to what's truly actually happening within the body. It's not necessarily worried about diagnosing a specific condition, but rather trying to uncover the current functionality, the current situation, and the trajectory with which we're on, leading potentially to disease state, right? And when we do this testing, like I've got a test kit sitting right here beside me right now that I have to get done as soon as I'm back from my upcoming trip. The idea is, can we truly uncover the underlying specific pathophysiology, physiological function, the microbiome changes, the underlying issues? And these tend to be kind of, until we feel them, these are what we call the hidden triggers or the hidden issues. And this is where functional lab testing can really come in and help open up our eyes to what's truly happening. And I think this is true across the board, whether it's a professional athlete or a stay-at-home mom. It doesn't matter. We need to go and understand what's really happening underneath. And that helps to create changes at a root cause level. And when we do so in an effective way, we can create real change. And I'd love to kind of dig into this idea with you of athletes. We tend to kind of have this idea that athletes are at peak health. And I think there's a bit of a misnomer here that there actually is some underlying potential issues that could be affecting their ability to perform at a high level. Sure, they're gifted, genetically gifted, or talent gifted in some capacity to be able to get to the level that they're at. But oftentimes, testing can uncover things that are hidden underneath the surface. I'd love to hear about what you've found in terms of working with these athletes, with these high performers in their functional lab testing. And we're not going to obviously name names or any particular people per se, and that's by design. But I would love to hear about, are there certain issues, certain patterns that you've been able to identify in the work that you've done with these athletes?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is a huge gap. And this is why I chose to go into more in the high performance space, because in the teams, they are doing a lot of incredible work. They are looking at blood work. They are looking at specific inflammatory panels, but we're not really looking at the gut. And sometimes the buy-in is really hard when you're asking an athlete to, let's send out some stool samples. But the people that truly have done their research and looked into how the gut microbiome is related to joint health, tendon repair, autoimmune disease, brain health, those people get it. And with gut health, we also need to know that 70% of your immune system resides in your gut. And a lot of these guys are getting chronically injured. They're having really hard problem rehabbing. And a lot of these ATs and PTs are scratching their head and they're like, what is going on here? And so what I have to also challenge the norm and look at the out of box thinking of what is going on with their immune system that we need to optimize. Are they actually absorbing the nutrients that is given to them, which has to do with the environment of the gut microbiome, and then go from there. And so a lot of the times that I do test an athlete, I look at the absorption of the nutrients, specifically amino acids, because if you want to look back at tendon health, and if you want to look at a lot of the byproducts that does support tendon health, that would be an amino acid issue. Okay. And so we need to look at their gut and seeing that if they are absorbing the amino acids, and if they're not absorbing amino acids, then there are certain supplements, there are certain things that we can do to support that. And going from what you do, also vagal health, if they are in high sympathetic health, which they are traveling a lot. Basketball players are required to play at least minimum 82 games a year. They're away from their family. They're chronically stressed. So this is a population that are being challenged constantly. And to not look at their gut health, we're really looking and missing a huge gap in how they could also excel in their performance and their health.
I love that you've brought this up. I think a lot of the work that's being done, or a lot of the social media type things that are out there, and these short form educational tools that people tend to utilize in trying to figure out what's going on in them, focuses a lot on macronutrients, right? And they're focused on, am I getting enough protein? Am I getting enough fats? What's my carb intake? And yes, macros matter, but it only matters if you're not getting what you're intending to get, right? So let's quickly, for kind of people that don't fully understand, what is an amino acid and where do we get it, and what's necessary from a gut function perspective to be able to get amino acids into the cells so that you can end up creating that repair process internally. Let's break that down.
Yeah. So we got to understand that the gut is a muscle. Okay. So, obviously there's peristalsis that happens and that there's a lot of musculature that goes on there. So, what an amino acid is, it is a certain type of, whenever we ingest proteins, we break those proteins down and it makes those amino acids. And the reason why those are so important is because they are involved in the repair of muscle. Okay. Again, going back to the athletic population, whether you're a football player, basketball player, you want to make sure that you are actually breaking those down and making sure that you are absorbing those amino acids. So, really making sure that we're getting enough protein in, which, believe it or not, some of the guys that I work with said, they really struggle in getting the amount of protein that they should be getting. And I think it's just one of those things that we need to make sure that for the average person like you and I, we need to get at least, 1.2 grams per kilogram in order to have really good protein intake and amino acid status. Now, for the person that is running through that and they're training heavily, and you're a pro athlete or you're a college athlete or even a high school athlete, we need to up that up to at least, 1.6 to 1.8. And then from my surgical background, now looking back, people that are having knee surgery or that are very sedentary, we know that we're not building muscle because we're more sedentary. And so that needs to go to at least 2.2, especially on the surgical floor. And I think that's education that needs to happen as well.
I love that. I like this visualization or this kind of simple analogy when it comes to protein and amino acids that I share with a lot of my clients. And that is, amino acids are like Lego building blocks, right? Each Lego building block is an amino acid, and you can utilize each of those Legos and put them together in whatever combination and produce a protein. And our muscles are made of protein. Our gut is made of protein. Every single organ in our body is essentially a protein structure, and it produces proteins and signaling amino acids, and even like neurotransmitters are proteins. And right, they're all built by amino acids. So in order for our building blocks to become present and for us to create a repair process, we need to take in enough Lego building blocks to be able to repair any damage to the tissue that's occurred over time. And sympathetic drive, this is that fight or flight state, causes a little bit of breakdown to those tissues, right? So whether you're performing in game at an athletic event or whether you're dealing with the stress of getting your kids out of the house, there's going to be a breakdown that occurs in your body. The muscles are going to break down, the tissues, the gut is going to break down. And if you don't get enough protein in, you don't get enough of these Lego building blocks in, and you can't break the Legos apart into their component pieces effectively in the gut, then you're not going to be able to rebuild because you won't have the raw materials on the rebuild process. So it sounds very much like this is the interaction of gut health and immune health and how the gut and the immune system work together. Let's start in the gut a little bit because I think this is a big piece to the puzzle that you've really highlighted a lot online. And that is the idea that most high performers obsess over their training and nutrition and timing and sleep, but that missing link for them is often that gut health. Let's talk about kind of why the gut is so foundational to everything when it comes to the ability to perform.
Well, I can tell you from what I've seen from the testing and everything like that, when the environment of our gut, think of it as we have an army there. Okay. So what I test for is do we have enough armies to be able to protect our gut, right? And we call that in functional medicine commensal bacteria. So the three biggest things that I look at are, number one, do we have enough bifidobacterium? Okay. Bifidobacterium is huge when it comes to the immune system. And they've also seen ties to autoimmune disease and brain health as well. So the way I think of it is B for bifidobacterium and B for brain health. There's also lactobacillus. Lactobacillus is heavily tied into not just the immune system as well, but from the athlete perspective, it ties to also musculoskeletal health. And the third one that I look at is Akkermansia. And Akkermansia is also heavily tied to blood sugar regulation, and it's tied to the lining of the gut. So the more Akkermansia we have, the thicker the lining of the gut. And the reason why that's important is because we don't want anything to pass through. And when those, like, if you want to visualize, fecal matter passing through or particles passing through, that's pretty disgusting because that goes into the bloodstream and that can affect your joints and that can affect your brain health. And so really looking at, okay, do I have a really good environment? Do I have an army of really good commensal bacteria to protect me? So that way I'm able to have better energy, better cognitive health, better sleep, better performance. And that way I'm armed in that way.
Yeah, the gut microbiome is an area that really needs to be looked at. And I'm really happy that you're doing that work because I have friends out here which are essentially these same exact songs. We've got Dr. Sabine Hazen, she's created this hashtag of #save the Biff for bifidobacter, right? Bifidobacter being so necessary in brain development. In fact, when we're children, when we're very young, the amount of bifidobacter that's present in the microbiome, in that commensal keystone army protecting us bacterial area is so high. That changes as we age. We will decrease the BIF and increase more lactobacillus, increase the Akkermansia, increase a few other very important keystone bacteria in there, but it changes as we age. But the BIF is so necessary right off the bat. And as you said, it's linked to many neurological conditions. There's autism, ADD, ADHD are strongly linked to a lack of bifidobacter bacteria. So these pieces really do need to be addressed. And it's not something that, oh my goodness, I'm now older, so should I even care about this? No, the answer is you should care about it at your age because you can work to optimize the terrain there. And I'd love to ask you about some of the specific therapeutic recommendations that you tend to find work well for helping to restore some of those keystone bacteria. What are some of the probiotic supplements, foods, tools, therapies that you have found to be effective in helping to realign and create a stronger army in the gut?
Yeah. Well, obviously, a lot of it is personalized. I can share a few things for sure to support your audience and to support anyone that's listening right now. Some of the things that when it comes to bifidobacter, the first thing that comes to my mind is HMO, human milk oligosaccharides. And again, you talked about how babies, whenever they are born, the bifidobacterium is huge, and part of that is when they are first breastfed, the mom's milk does contain human milk oligosaccharides. And so the cool thing is right now there are supplements that are made in that form. So it's a powder that you could take every single day to really support that. And the reason why that's important is because, again, the thicker the gut lining is, the better off you are when it comes to your immune system. Another one that I absolutely love is also colostrum. Colostrum is a really good support for the gut lining. There's also been studies around garlic. Another thing is red apple skins that has really high HMOs as well. So red apple skins is a really good one. And when it comes to modality, I think we want to look at the supplement. What is the next thing outside of ourselves? And I always like to start with the low-hanging fruit whenever I work with someone and really get curious about their lifestyle and really get curious about their environment, right? We talk about epigenetics, we talk about the environment and how that's really important for our gut as well. So I could give someone the best protocol. I can suggest the best supplements, but if they're chronically stressed and they've got a really huge lag in their relationships, they don't feel very fulfilled in their lives. They don't really have a purpose. They're not sleeping well. They're, those types of things, then the protocol isn't going to be as efficient as I want it to be. And so, which drives the conversation between the brain and the gut, right? The nervous system. And so initially, a lot of the guys that I work with and the women that I work with, high performers, obviously they want to get tested. They want to be told what their nutrition looks like, what their supplement plan looks like. Great. As I start getting rapport from them, as they start trusting me little by little, I start getting to get curious about their health and the environment and how they're doing mentally as well.
I think this is a big piece for a lot of people, understanding that the psychological component plays a huge role in enabling this to occur. And you've brought up recovery. And I think this is something that I kind of want to get back to, because this is where the nervous system really does its work, right? And specifically the parasympathetic component of the autonomic nervous system. This is where the vagus nerve gets its mojo and does its magic work. And that is that the analogy of the sympathetics being like the accelerator of a car, and the parasympathetics and the vagus nerve being like the brakes and the braking system of the car. There's a few things that you need to know here. First off, it's not like a light switch, right? It's not like a dimmer switch where these two systems are on one circuit and you can increase or decrease the intensity towards one side or the other. They're two separate systems, but they're working synergistically with one another. So the accelerator is based on the motor and the engine pushing the car and rotating the tires, the axles, and going. And then the braking system is built on stopping the turning of the wheels and slowing down. Over time, the engine will decrease in functionality. And that's the idea of this system working. When we need to repair, when we need to recover, when we need healing to take place, we can't be in motion, right? The car can't be moving for you to fill gas. The car cannot be moving for you to charge an EV if it's an EV that you're driving. Your car can't be moving when the mechanic is taking a look at the car, right?
Right.
They need to pause, open up the hood. The car needs to stop in order for that process to take place. And repairs can only take place within the car when the car is generally stopped. So the same is true for the body, right? The body needs to be in a restful state, a calm state, a relaxed vagus nerve activated state that then enables the healing to occur. And that healing occurs through the immune system. And you mentioned that 70% of the immune cells by volume are located in the lining of the gut. This is enormous. This is where the immune system is, I think, a little misunderstood. And it's something that we've made it a point to talk about on the podcast quite a bit, is that the immune system isn't just purely there for defense. It actually regulates the entire healing process as well. And depending on the signal that those immune cells are getting, if the signal is more towards strain and pushing and the accelerator is being pushed and the sympathetics are on, it's more prone to an inflammatory reaction. It's going to push towards inflammation. And an immune cell that is given signals from the vagus nerve to slow down, to calm down, is going to decrease inflammation and increase the repair and recovery and healing signals. And essentially, that's how this gut immune nervous system axis works well together. So this is such an important piece to understand, because a lot of high performance is not about the actual performance. It's about the healing and the recovery that happens between the performances.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let's talk about that recovery kind of process. I'd love to hear, because you talk about a lot of ATs and physios that are trying to understand why their high performance athlete clients are not recovering quickly. And it often starts with gut health, and it starts with looking at the psychological impacts, because those are going to strain the nervous system. Let's talk about how recovery and healing occurs within the body.
Yeah. No, I love that. I always say we've got two energies. We have the sympathetic system, which is the drive, which is what has gotten the athlete to where they've gotten, right? Without that motivation, without that drive, they wouldn't be where they're at. And I think what we need to acknowledge is that running on that drive 365 days a year, you're going to end up being burnout. And that's where we lead into problems where we do start seeing some gut problems. And we do start seeing, intestinal permeability, and we start seeing delayed recovery and HRV not really being at its best. And when a metric that is used in sport, heart rate variability, I always say, yes, we are looking at the heart, but we are also getting a lot of information about the sympathetic system. Well, what drives the sympathetic system? It's the gut brain axis too. And so we want to acknowledge that there is a really big missing piece on this. And a lot of the work that I do see some ATs and some PTs really initiating is, hey, let's get them into a place where they can do some breath work. And that could be the 4-7-8 mode that we can do, right? And getting them into a state where maybe they look outside of their sport that's really bringing them joy, or maybe not having their phone with them when they're doing recovery and scrolling and reading about, the comments from the night before, because that's also a trigger. So we want to really get curious about, okay, what are some of those triggers on a daily lifestyle basis, and how can we also initiate ways where they could also get recovery and really slow down the nervous system, whether they're doing their red light therapy, they're in their hyperbaric chamber, they're on the table and they're getting their recovery through their PT. How can we also use breath work as a modality in order to support their nervous system as well?
I had never thought about that. And I this particular thing that you just said, because of the type of world and the situation that we live in, where athletes are under a microscope, right?
Yeah.
They're watched by millions of people all around the world, and all these millions of people have their opinion, and many
Right.
hundreds and thousands of them are going to be posting comments about, man, this person and that person, and
Exactly.
I can't believe this happened, and we got to trade this guy, and
Right.
I can't imagine, but it makes so much sense that when they're sitting there and they're in their recovery process, but they're on their
Yeah.
phone and they're seeing these comments,
Right.
they're not able to enter a parasympathetic state,
No.
right? And it's these are personal comments. These are like, if not taken care of effectively or not avoided, these can be little traumas that are happening consistently, little pushes of the accelerator, little shifts toward that sympathetic state. What an important thing to note, right? That recovery needs to be done 100%. Recovery of your body doesn't mean that you can let your mind go off into social media land. It really does require you to enter a true, all-encompassing healing state. So putting the phone away is actually in itself a therapeutic tool, and not reading the comments is a therapeutic tool, and working to create better performance is a better tool. And that's such an interesting thing. I hadn't thought about it, but it really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. 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 No, I've had a couple players say that they've deleted their Instagram and they're not on anymore. And you got to take care of yourself. I mean, it's kind of brutal out there, and you and I are on Instagram, and everyone's going to have their comments, and they're going to have their feedback and all that kind of thing. So really, it's just a matter of also really protecting our mental health, and finding ways throughout our day to really disconnect from the screen, whether that is just having moments where we could do breath work, where we could take off our shoes, go outside, get some sun, ground. Again, a lot of my players that are traveling, things that I really highly recommend doing is, hey, you're on the plane, you're traveling a lot, so you got to make sure that you support your nervous system with some grounding and getting your feet on that ground, on the grass, as much as you can, and making sure to protect your energy and sleep. I think that's a really, really key thing too, is making sure that you're getting that sufficient amount of sleep, and on the road, making sure that you're eating well.
One of the things that I've heard from a couple of the athletes that I've worked with, but haven't worked with nearly the number that you have. But one of the things that I've heard is that a lot of the sport performance experiences, games, are late in the day. They're later in the evening. That's basically by design for us to be able to go and watch and be the audience and pay their bills and pay their salaries. But what that does is it pushes their sympathetics into a hyperdrive later in the day and before bedtime. And one of the more common things that I've heard is they have a lot of difficulty getting to sleep following performance. Sleep is this area that absolutely needs to be protected. What have you found to be effective in helping athletes ramp down following game time, following performance, and to be able to enter that sleeping zone really well?
hmm That is a great question. And a lot of that, we're also going to talk about the lights that they're exposed to. Obviously, we know that what triggers melatonin at night is our eyes to darkness. And a lot of the players are playing in the evening with really flashing lights. And so, one of the things that I really advise my players to do is make sure that they have blue light blockers right after the game as they're on the table getting recovery. Go ahead and putting those blue blockers on. That actually starts to trigger that melatonin response that, hey, it's time to wind down a little bit. Other thing that I tell them to do is not grab, something processed or sugary, to make sure that, number one, protein also helps calm the nervous system down. So again, that's an amino acid. So we want to make sure that we support the body with some type of, nutrition that has a lot of protein in it. And then another thing is that sometimes we initiate things like, ashwagandha, magnesium, that can really help them calm down and put them in a parasympathetic state in order for them to calm down and get ready for bed.
Yeah, it's that wind down that so many people, whether you're a high performing athlete or not, you have a lot of difficulty winding down. It's particularly
Mhm.
difficult, I think, when the lights are really bright. Not just
Right.
physically the lights are bright, but the microscope is on you and you're performing, and it's 82 nights in a 6-month stretch that you're like out and working and trying
Right.
to then wind down so often. It's so challenging to be able to do that. Even day to day, people have difficulty winding down after getting their kids to bed, and the
Mhm.
stress of their normal days. So this is a unique issue that I think the athletes have to deal with, such intensity of these bright lights and sympathetic overdrive. So I love what you've said. I'm big fan of blue light blocking glasses, big fan of protein to help with the wind down, and the breath work and the calming tools that are out there. Ashwagandha and these great herbs are there to help calm things down. Obviously, on a case by case basis, this isn't like generic everybody advice.
Exactly.
Have you ever used any vagus nerve stimulators or anything with any of these athletes to help them with that wind down?
I have, and there's some that are out there in the market that actually goes to the neck, and there's some that does the ear. Sometimes I just have them just say, hey, just put two of your fingers around the back of your ear and just kind of start stimulating the back of your ear like that. Just because for them to have their device with them, typically that doesn't happen. They forget it in their house. And so it's just a really easy way to just, you know, uh, palpate the behind of the ear and just really in a circular motion, just stimulate that for a couple minutes can also trigger the vagus response as well.
Yeah, I love that. It's sometimes we just need a little bit of an additional push to help enable that wind down, that calming experience for these athletes. So this is a big one for me. I'm really interested in how we can create that downshift and enter that parasympathetic state more readily. And some of these tools that you've mentioned are just phenomenal. So I'm glad that
What is
you've
your
brought them up.
favorite? What is your favorite?
um, you know, I've used a bunch, as I'm sure you're aware.
Yeah.
I've used
Or,
the cervical devices like the Truvaga and the Pulsetto. I've tried out. I've also had a lot of good experience with the Yojo auricular device, and I really like the ZenBud device, which is an ultrasound-based stimulator. And it's headphones just like this with a nice little ultrasound prong that goes to the spot in the ear, and you can listen to audio at
mhm,
the same time. So that's a really cool device.
great. Amazing.
These are a lot of my favorites. I did a whole episode on how to choose a vagus nerve stimulator for anybody who's interested. Go back to that one. It was
Absolutely.
just about a couple
Yeah,
months ago that came out. But
exactly. Hmm.
key is, what are you going to use and what are you going to use
Hmm.
consistently? Like, I have a
Right.
pocket in my backpack when I travel that my Truvaga goes into, and it fits and it's small and it's easy, and that's my to go VNS device. Um,
Yeah,
and it's great because, I'm speaking on a stage. That's a sympathetic state, right? So I'll
exactly.
use the stim device before I get up, and I'll use it again when I come down or when I'm going to bed. And it really helps me regulate the circadian system and get
Great.
into a better sleep zone and increase my HRV and do all the wonderful things that it does. So in terms of my favorite, it's always going to be the one that you're going to use, no question.
For sure.
But that's a really good question from you as well. So, but I like the idea of even just simply physically palpating under the mastoid, right? Getting that area physically stimulated as a calming self-therapeutic massage can be enough for people that are trying to wind down at any point. I'd love to hear if you've been able to extrapolate what you do into like corporate performance and into performers outside of just athletics. I'm sure there's a lot of parallels to be drawn between them, but people that are showing up for work at a high performance job, a high performance, like high stress situations in a corporate environment or whatnot. Do you find that there's a lot of similarities, a lot of parallels there? Is there anything nuanced that's different?
Very, very much. They very much mirror each other. The athletes, basketball players, NFL players, those are more, physical. The corporate athletes, it's more mental. They use a lot of mental energy throughout the day. And really, when I'm looking at both their labs, they really do mirror each other, very similar. And it really just also emphasizes the brain-gut connection and how whenever you are under a lot of stress, whether the stress could be, environmental, it could be from playing a lot of games, it could be from having to be in meetings throughout the day, 40 hours a week. It could be the stress really does perpetuate a lot of symptoms that people feel in their gut as well.
You mentioned labs and testing, and I'd love to dig into, because you test for quite a few biomarkers, right? And I think that's necessary for us to get a clear picture on an individualized basis as to what's happening internally. Let's talk a little bit about the top kind of 2 or 3 biomarkers that you are more focused on right off the bat when you start working with a new client. So what are you testing for, and what are the 2 or 3 that you're really looking out for when you're assessing?
Yeah, so I would say the top 3, the first one would be aclin-zonulin. I look at just not aclin-zonulin by itself. I look at the antibodies, so IgG, IgA, IgM. And the reason why that's important is because they're microscopically 2 small, tight junctures that connect the colonocytes. So colonocytes are colon cells together. And if I do see a positive aclin-zonulin level, then that also flags a intestinal permeability, which is leaky gut. That means the gut's compromised. The second thing that I look at is LPS. LPS, lipopolysaccharides. I know Dr. Rhonda Patrick, she did actually on the Metabolic Summit, she talked about LPS and how LPS can cross the blood-brain barrier. So it's a very strong gram-negative bacteria. It's not necessarily a bad thing to have, but when I do see a positive LPS, that warrants also a protocol for us to eradicate that. And because we can start having a lot of cognitive problems. And for the athlete, it could be maybe low motivation. It could be, not being quick on the court or not being quick on the field. So we want to make sure that that is taken care of. And the third thing would be butyrate. We look at butyrate levels because butyrate is highly tied to gut health, and it's tied to the health of the lining of the gut. And the more butyrate that we have, the lower incidences that we have of intestinal permeability. Butyrate is also tied to neurocognitive health. So later on in the future, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune disease. And there's so much more. I look at I'll just throw a fourth one in. I look at digestive enzymes. So I look at pancreatic elastase. We want to make sure that pancreatic elastase levels are high, which means that we're digesting our protein. If that's low, then, I usually tell clients, hey, maybe chew a little slower, not chew your food so quickly. So that way we make sure that we're digesting our amino acids and digesting our protein. And if not, then, we'll put them on a digestive enzyme.
I love these. There's so many parallels between what you're doing and what I would look for. And this gut health picture is so important to fully understand because this is where a lot of the inflammation in the body really pops up. And you mentioned them. I'm just going to quickly go over them. The zonulin occludin and then the antibodies of the gut, IgA, IgM, IgE. These are huge on identifying immune regulation within the gut. Lipopolysaccharide, LPS, is telling us how much of the toxic burden that's in the gut from the bad bacteria is getting in and how leaky is your gut. And then what is that affecting from an inflammation standpoint in the rest of your body? Butyrate is a direct signaling molecule, just like the other short-chain fatty acids, through the vagus nerve to the brain, telling us that we're in good shape, that our gut is working well. And like digestive enzymes are how well is the pancreas functioning, able to send out these nutrients so that we can truly absorb the nutrients into our body. And vagus nerve plays a role in every single one of those. So I just have to give that little plug. But
Yes, it
this is
does.
great. This is just
Yes.
such a good, simple breakdown. What's happening in the gut? How leaky is it? Can we fix it? The answer always is yes. You can fix it if you identify what's
Man,
causing
your gut
it.
is resilient.
That is it. Exactly. Resilience being the ultimate goal, right? And I think the ability to recover, like to be able to go through a stressor and then bounce back from the stressor is the ultimate goal of what you and I are both trying to do. Because you said it earlier, you said sympathetics get athletes to where they are now. But if you want to stay there, it's the parasympathetics, the recovery process, the healing that you go into, the habitual healing, the healing habits that are going to keep you there forever or for as long as you possibly can be. And so your longevity in sport, your longevity in performance comes down to truly your ability to recover and bounce back.
Yes,
I love that.
you got it. I feel like that was it. That was like,
I'm going to clip that one for Instagram for
I
sure.
love it.
The inflammation conversation is one that we haven't really dug into, but I think it's an important one to understand. We talked about the immune system, 70% of it in the gut. The idea that when we have zonulin and occludin markers positive, that means that the tight junctions are breaking down and we don't have this tight barrier protecting the gut lining anymore. And the lipopolysaccharide can enter. And the LPS, what it's going to do is trigger that immune cell or all of those immune cells that are present in the gut lining to produce inflammation. What is the effect of inflammation when it starts in the gut and what does it then do? And I know people know this, but I'd love to hear your take on it.
Yeah, I mean, inflammation can look very differently from person to person, right? Inflammation can look like acne. It can look like bloating. It can look like delayed recovery, meaning their joints are, very stiff and they're just not feeling well. It could be, gosh, I've got 8 hours of sleep, but I'm not fully rested. It could be so many things that we can look at. And I think with inflammation, we really need to be careful with that word because I also want to acknowledge inflammation as being a good thing. And I think what we try to do is look on Instagram and TikTok of how to lower as much inflammation as possible. So, acute inflammation is healthy for us. Acute inflammation just teaches our body to become more resilient. Think about when we go to the gym and you're lifting and you're breaking down muscle tissue, muscle fibers. That's acute inflammation. That's going to add gains to our body and to our health and our performance. What we really need to look at is chronic inflammation. And we're living right now in 2026 with our agriculture not being where it needs to be. We're not getting the nutrients, enough nutrients in the soil for our produce to grow in a way where we're able to get those nutrients in our food system. We're exposed to glyphosate, which are, it's a pesticide that's being sprayed across golf courses and our foods. We're not getting enough sleep. We are not exposed to the sun as what we need to be exposed to. We're under a lot of chronic stress, the news. And so there's a lot of, where we can say, chronic inflammation is okay, what are maybe some of the things that we need to go back to really the way our ancestors lived, which is really making food simple, being comfortable with food that is made over a span of 2 hours versus in a span of 5 minutes, those types of things. And so inflammation has a really big, it's, there could be a whole podcast about inflammation. But I think you get the gist of what I'm saying, that we live in a society that's just very incredibly high paced, and it's not sustainable.
Yeah, you're right on track there, and inflammation is a good thing in an acute scenario, right? You're exactly right how you mentioned it. The key is not stopping inflammation. The key is controlling inflammation, and you put it beautifully there. I think that's so important for us to note. So let's, at minimum, do our best to limit the sources of stress that are affecting us and build the capacity for adaptation, for resilience through building vagal tone, through building parasympathetic nervous system capability. That's ultimately what the goal of what we're trying to do is. You mentioned glyphosate, and I just want to kind of go to the food side of things because you mentioned nutrient depleted foods and glyphosate and toxic burden. On a food basis, are there specific recommendations? We're not leading towards a particular diet that you're like proponent of, but what are some of the nutrients? What are some of the dietary principles that should be taken into account for high performers?
Yeah. So what's really interesting is looking at foods that really does support us. Just how there's an in season and off season. People need to understand that food has an in season and off season as well. And so the way that I explain this to my players and chefs, and how I explain it to nutritionists and dietitians, is really look at the foods that are in season, because the foods that are in season actually have they're grown in a particular time where the in-season foods are also, they extravagate certain energy from the sun. Okay. And so when we eat those foods, what does that do in our body? It actually gives us positive electrons. Okay. And those positive electrons actually gives us energy. The foods that are grown out of season, well, they're being exposed to the sun, but at another area, in another country. But when we're eating them and it's not in season for us, it actually steals those positive electrons, and that can deplete our energy. So I want to also bring it back to, look at more getting foods from farmers, from local farm resources, eating that's in season. Obviously, try to get organic with someone that is just really trying to have a healthy lifestyle. I don't really harp on the organic as much. And the reason being is because, okay, I'm trying to get someone, say, for example, a CEO, high performer that's really just trying to lose weight and he's just learning new habits. I don't harp on the organic as much as I would as someone that's already kind of practicing that. And so really looking at those food choices, obviously, seed oils is a really big deal. Seed oils, when we ingest those stays in our body for about 2 years, 2 to 3 years. So to make sure that we're not getting too much of that. And I always make the analogy, Navaz, that anything, if you look at the grocery store, anything that is inside of the grocery store, you want to try to stay, like, most of your groceries should not be what's inside of the grocery store. Most of the groceries should be what's in the perimeter of the grocery store. So it's kind of a nice little analogy that I like to break down.
Yeah, very much the whole foods conversation. Get the foods that are available to you. And I love this idea of seasonality of food locally, right? Like I shouldn't be eating mangoes and papayas in January in Toronto. It's not, we're not growing these tropical fruits over here. At the same time,
Yeah.
like, you want to eat locally and you want to eat seasonally. And I think that is so good because you're actually talking about whole foods that are being built locally in these experience, like nearby at the time where they're meant to be. And you're getting the energy that the sun and nature is meant to provide to you in the instance, in the time that you are taking it in. That is, we're exactly on the same page here. And I love that you were able to kind of convey that in very simple, easy to follow terms. So I've loved this conversation so far. And I want to end with asking you kind of, if there was one thing, it doesn't need to be one, but if there can be one thing that every high performer kind of needs to hear and made a decision to do differently beginning tomorrow and did so consistently based on your work, not a protocol, not a stack of supplements, if there's just one shift that they could make to upgrade their health, what would that be?
I would say slow down.
I like it.
That's so hard. it is so hard to slow down. And if you could just 5 minutes on your phone, it doesn't have to be this whole meditation thing, but just no screens, no calls, just give it a break and slow down. I think that would really be advantageous to just be in a place where, okay, we're bringing our body to be able to absorb our nutrients. We're able to maybe think about what we're doing throughout the day. Is it within alignment of what we want to create and what we want to achieve versus being on the go, go, go? So taking that 5 minute pause to slow down would be the number one thing I would really recommend.
I love it. I couldn't agree more. We're in such a stressful state pretty much all the time, and we're not giving our body an opportunity to slow down. We often think that, I can just sit down and be on my phone and that's going to put me into a sympathetic state or parasympathetic state because that's me resting. When you're then scrolling for 30 minutes
Right.
because you're stuck trying to figure out this new thing, or you're just in a state where your brain needs to be given information. And that's actually very much sympathetic overdrive. So this has
For
been
sure.
just a brilliant conversation, just wonderful, wonderful information.
So
I think
fun.
so much for
Yeah.
people to take from it and to learn and to utilize in their own lives, whether you're a professional athlete or not, right? In order to be able to show up in the world and live an upgraded life, you need to upgrade your health and you need to upgrade your recovery and your resilience. And I just have had such a great time conversing with you and sharing this wonderful information. Where can people learn more about you and your work and potentially book a call with you and see if they can get better utilizing your work?
Yeah, it's pretty simple. My first and last name. I try not to complicate it. For Instagram, Maggie Awad, AWAD. I'm on Instagram. I'm on also my website, maggieawad.com. And I'm on LinkedIn as well. So no TikTok. I
You and me both. I've avoided it so far and I'm going to keep
think
it
that's
going.
enough for me.
I love it.
Yeah.
I think this was amazing, and we will definitely have you back, and we can definitely
Awesome.
discuss the depth of this a little bit more. We can discuss inflammation in a whole other episode.
For sure.
This was great, and I have loved it. Thank you for joining us. For anybody who got to this point in the podcast, please share this episode with one person who you think could utilize this information to upgrade their health, and we'll catch you all on the next one.